Welcome back to another Provident webinar. I'm your host, Ed Mann, Director of Training and Education. Tonight, we all had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Jennifer Taylor from the First Center at Drexel University as she discusses how we can protect EMS responders from workplace violence and stress, from policy to practice. Some of you might be saying to yourself, what in the world does a doctor of epidemiology know about first responder injuries and deaths? I'm here to tell you, I've known Jenn for nearly 20 years and have personally watched her present to fire and EMS personnel. And I will tell you, she is extremely passionate about helping us prevent injuries and deaths. In other words, she knows what she's talking about based on data related to fire and EMS injuries and deaths. And we are all fortunate to have her and her team working on our behalf. In a few moments, I'll have Dr. Taylor introduce herself and give our listeners some background on the work the First Center does on behalf of first responders. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions, and we're asking you to use the question and answer feature to send your questions. We will make every effort to answer all of them. However, if we don't get to your specific question, we will get answers to you via email in the days following the webinar. I'd like to run through a couple of introductory slides about who Provident is. Provident Insurance Programs started in 1902 as an independent insurance agency in Pittsburgh. In 1928, they saw a need to customize accident and health policy for volunteer fire departments. Today, we provide volunteer combination and career firefighters and emergency medical responders with a multitude of programs. We also offer special risk and transportation programs. Provident is celebrating its 5th year as the top insurance workplace by the Insurance Business America magazine. Some of the programs that we offer, we have an accident and health program. And if you're an accident and health client or not an accident and health client, would like to become one, please understand that you have access to our first responder assistance program. We also have a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment policy that we can provide to fire departments, a group term life policy, critical illness and cancer policy, and of course, our Fire Plus property and casualty insurance. In other words, we insure things as well as people. And if you're a Fire Plus property and casualty client or become a property and casualty client, you have access to our Fire Plus Training Academy, which is an online training program. And the majority of the EMS courses are approved by CAPC for continuing education credit. So without further ado, tonight, it's great to have Dr. Taylor with us. Dr. Taylor, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it so much. And good evening, everyone. Thanks for spending your time with us. It's my pleasure to talk with you about policies that have been developed to protect fire-based EMS responders from violence on the job and the resulting stress of too many runs with too few resources. I want to first begin by telling you about the Center for Firefighter Injury Research and Safety Trends, blessedly known as the FIRST Center because I'm a professor of public health and everything we do is an acronym. Here's our website. And this is just a screenshot of what's on it because I don't like to link to websites and PowerPoint presentations because then everything falls apart. And then you feel like you're one of my students in the classroom who's like, why can't that lady work a projector? So we do a lot at the FIRST Center for you. Everything that we do responds to the 16 national life safety initiatives. And our program areas include diversity, equity, and inclusion, research to practice, and policy. So this is what we're largely going to be talking about today. We are known as data geeks in the United States Fire and Rescue Service, but the purpose of data are to change policy. And that is when we know data are truly useful for you. Another aspect of our portfolio is responsive to National Life Safety Initiative number 1, which is about fire service safety culture. So we have created a tool called Focus the Fire Service Organizational Culture of Safety Survey, which is now about to enter its fourth wave of national administration. Over 650 fire departments and over 60,000 firefighters know what the commitment to safety looks like in their departments. And this survey looks at things by both fire and EMS sides of your work. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic and a rapid mental health assessment we did during the first 6 months of the pandemic, we are now adding a huge mental health module to focus based on our findings from this COVID-19 rapid mental health assessment. We are your injury data geeks. We've been working and linking injury data for years. And today I'm going to be talking about our particular policy work in this aspect of your work, the EMS side of your work, in a portfolio known as Stress and Violence to Fire-Based EMS Responders, or SAVER. I've also had the pleasure of working with the IAFC's National Firefighter Near-Miss Reporting System. And if you don't know about near-miss, you really need to check it out and report, because this tells us about the bad stuff before it hits us, the things that could have caused injury but didn't because we intercepted it. And so this is a really important data system. And I personally, as a scientist, have learned so much from the system. The other thing that I want to tell you is, as you might be able to see by my hair, I'm getting grayer and grayer, but have no fear, because at the First Center, we have the Fire Fellowship. It is a summer fellowship, a paid fellowship of 10 weeks, 400 hours, where graduate students at Drexel University, at our School of Public Health, become immersed in the fire and rescue service and then do research for you based on your priorities. So they just graduated last week. So if I look a little more gray, it's just because I had way too much fun. But the First Center will always be there for you. I won't, because I'm gonna, bust the pension system and retire someday. But we are training the next generation of fire service researchers, and I want you to know that. But the most important thing that I want to point you to here is our publications link. Everything that we do with the fire and rescue service, I'm going to put this in the chat for you, and maybe the host can, then Sam can chat it back to you. Everything that we do with you is available for you for free in our publications website. So if you want to read some of the thoughts of your brothers and sisters in the fire service, here they are. You can download them as many times as you want. Toolbox talks, kitchen table talks, ISTs, it's all here for you. We use our money from FEMA and other agencies to pay for this, so you don't have to. So please dip in that well as much as you'd like.
Jen, we'll also have that link in the email we send out to all our participants tomorrow.
Fantastic. Appreciate that, Ed, so much. So for those of you who don't know me, I tend to curse a bit, and I'm a steamfitter's daughter. It's just kind of how I came up. But also, because this is a session about workplace violence, I am going to show some images and some videos that can be upsetting or triggering. And I'm not trying to do that to offend you, but rather to explain to you and use things that I think help the communities you serve understand the risks you experience. And without showing those images, people just don't get it. So, but the other side of that is the content will give us common language to talk about workplace violence. It'll give us data to support the need to do something. And we're going to present to you policy solutions that were developed by you with me to deal with this issue. I'll paste some resources at the end that are available. If this has been upsetting to everyone or someone you know, please use those. They are from National Fire Service organizations. So let's talk about workplace violence, or what is sometimes called WPV, because everything's an acronym, right? And I just wanted to start by sharing with you that this is part of our research to practice journey at the First Center. So what do I mean by that? We do research with the fire service for the fire service. We do research with you, not on you. And that research is great, but if it never gets to the field, it's useless. And at the First Center, our research to practice pipeline is about 4 years on average. And so that is a really good turnaround time. And it's only possible because of the people who have chosen to collaborate with us and help us on this particular issue. So it started back in the day with USFA and IAFF they gave us a contract to do a literature review about what is known about violence to firefighters. And, you know, the geeks, we all go to the scientific literature, but actually where the gold was in the industrial literature, was in your journals, your industry journals. And for 40 years, you have been talking about getting the shnikes bitten out of you on the job, right? And so that's where it began. And a lot of the things that you're going to see codified in policy today come from your words in like GEMS and EMS1 and all of those, you know, EMS manager publications and all those types of things. So keep those cards and letters coming, because somebody is listening and somebody is bringing that into a scientific frame that can be reproduced so that everyone in the fire service benefits. The second thing I want to mention here is you're all familiar with the FEMA Assistance to Fire Grants program, and there's a very small pot of that money for research and development. Well, I want to let you know that we at the First Center received the very first research grant from FEMA to look at the EMS side of fire, which really blows my mind because it's like 60 to 90% of what you do. So we really want to thank FEMA for their funding of the Stress and Violence in Fire-Based EMS Responders Project, or SAVER. That's where these policies that we're going to talk about today came from. And then the last thing I want to say is we're still somewhat in the research space. So the next thing that happened is the IAFF, through a FEMA grant they had, contracted with us at the First Center to develop an online workplace violence prevention curriculum. So this year it's going to be launched. In the winter, you're going to get for free career volunteer combo. Doesn't matter. It's the people's money. You will be able to take an online course on workplace violence prevention. And you may be like, Jen, that's nice, but I need to get the muscle memory. Okay. This course, you'll take the online course first, and then you'll take an in-person practical course where you will learn everything from self-size up, cultural humility, de-escalation techniques, through to evasive self-defense. So if you're familiar with the IAFF Fireground Survival course, it works just like that. Online course first and then in-person course second. So I just wanted to share with you how this all came about and give props to those people who put their money where their mouth was. Okay, so while we use violent encounters on EMS calls in a lot of examples, we know that violence can happen on any type of call. As evidenced by these headlines, violence can happen when police are on scene, violence can happen when police aren't on scene, violence can occur when it's a crew of 2 responding or a crew of 6, or on any type of call. This image shows Karasic's job demand matrix. Job demands refer to excessive workload, very hard or fast work, a lot of task interruption, intense concentration, and a lot of conflicting or competing demands. This is known as psychological demand or job demand, emotional work. Job decision latitude or job control is a combination of skill discretion like learning new things and having opportunities to develop skills, having a variety of activities, having non-repetitive work. It's a combination of skill discretion and decision authority, which is taking part in decisions affecting oneself, making one's own decisions, having a say on the job, and having freedom as to how the work is accomplished. So when you have a low demand job, not a lot of emotional demand, not a lot of control, you are in what's called a passive job. So an example of this might be a receptionist. When you have high job demands and high job control, meaning a lot of deadlines, but you get to have a lot of control over it, you have an active job. Excuse me, I'm sorry, when you have low job demand, but high job control, so not a lot of emotional demand, but a lot of rapid movement, you have what's called a low strain job. So an example of this might be an architect, for example. When you have a high demands job and high control, you have an active job. These jobs are known for high levels of creativity engagement, like a university professor. Finally, when you have high job demands and low job control, you have a high strain job. Guess where firefighters and EMS responders are? Now, we can't change the call volume or the job demand you have. So we have to change job control. So let me show you what I mean. This is from NFPA, and this blue line is the increase in EMS calls from 1980 to 2019. This went up 387%. This red line are the calls for fires in the same interval. Those calls went down 57%. So unfortunately, the EMS system is incredibly strained. Many people lack access to healthcare, have not been linked to the appropriate community resources, cannot afford to take off from work when they are sick, are increasingly stressed, etc. And often this means that the EMS system becomes one of the only public health solutions available. For you, this often means a heavy workload, infrequent rest breaks, and tasks that do not utilize your skills and provide little sense of control. And so you have a high strain job, low decision latitude, low job control, and high psychological demand. And you might be saying, no shit, Jen, but what you might, like, we know we have high strain jobs, but what you might not know is that you are in this box. You have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, musculoskeletal disease, psychological disorders, impaired and reduced immune function, and workplace injury. And in this case, from what you do, this high strain job carries with it the very likely exposure to violence. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health define workplace violence as violent acts, including physical assaults and threats of assaults directed towards persons at work or on duty. The World Health Organization takes it a little bit further and says these are incidents where staff are abused, threatened, or assaulted in circumstances related to their work. This could include commuting to and from work. And this involves an explicit or implicit challenge to their safety, well-being, or health. Now, there are two types of violence. We usually think of the physical violence, right? Physical abuse, hands and feet are weapons or actual weapons themselves, or things like a sexual assault. But there's also verbal violence, people yelling and cursing at you. Not me, that's not what I'm talking about, but people intimidating you, saying they're going to come after you or your family, or they're going to rob the ambulance of all the medications. People sexually harassing you on the job. These are where they use words to intimidate and cause strain. And the interesting thing about these two types of strain is that, when you are stressed, your body releases hormones, right? You're like, duh, Jen. Cortisol and neurotransmitters involved in the fight or flight response. And when you have short-lived or infrequent episodes of stress, you have this acute stress pathway that gets activated, then returns to stasis. No problem. That's what we're supposed to do. However, when we have traumatic stress, the body is kept in a constant state of activation. You might remember this as hyperactivation, and it increases the rate of wear and tear in your body. Those hormones are just constantly going. They never get to sink back. And so traumatic stress correlates with elevated levels of cortisol, glutamate, adrenaline, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this can negatively impact your behavioral health. So whether it's verbal or physical, and it's constant, which is what it is in the fire and rescue service, you are going to start to see adverse effects. So I would like to share with you a video of verbal violence. So I want to set this up for you. I'm only going to show a little bit of it because it really is quite upsetting. This is San Diego Fire Rescue, one of the partners of the First Center that helped develop the policies we're going to talk about today. They were called to a homeless camp in San Diego for a resident there who had burnt his foot. And so I'm going to fast forward to the point where, so police are already on scene. The paramedic, the ambulance has come now. San Diego uses a third-party transport. And now we've got a piece coming down the street with a firefighter crew on it. So I'm going to move this up to about 4 minutes. This is when, and this whole video will be available to you, but this is about when the piece is coming down the street.
You're part of the press, sir?
Yeah.
With these guys? I'm going to push you across the street.
No, you're not.
Actually,
No, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're not a cop. They're the cops.
okay.
It's none of your business.
Well, the fact that you're having a safety issue by standing in the street.
409.5 says I have the right to kill myself. Sorry, buddy. If you want to be a cop, why don't you fucking join the force, man? Did I interfere? I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. All right, then tell this fucking jerk off here.
That's unnecessary.
No, it is, because you're not a cop, pal. You're not a cop, asshole. You're a fucking bald-headed fucking fat asshole. That's who you are.
Can you please step out of the street?
No. You gonna arrest me? Then arrest me. Arrest me now. Arrest me now. Arrest me now. Arrest me now. Arrest me now.
I haven't addressed you the entire time.
I know. Well, tell that fat ass, the fucking little pussy. Oh, I'm scared of a fucking camera, man. I'm scared of a camera, you bald fucking asshole. Why don't you go home and fucking molest your kids like you always do?
Okay. I know that was a lot, but the reason that we've included this video is that this is, and I know I can't see you all, but I know you're all shaking your heads. If you run EMS, you have had either a patient or a bystander like this say horrible things to you. And when we think back to that hormonal pathway, if this is happening to you 2-3 times a day, every day, this hyperactivity is going to be your reality. So that's why we shared that video. Verbal violence is real. It's actually incredibly predominant when it comes to violence on the job. So this is a photograph of my colleague, Ben Vernon, also from the San Diego Fire Rescue Department. He's a firefighter paramedic, and he responded to a patient at a trolley stop in downtown San Diego. This was a bystander who stabbed him 3 times, collapsed his lung, and he nearly died. So this was the physical violence. There's a video of this that I'm happy to share if you're interested. But actually, even though this started as physical violence, the problem for Ben was the after effect. The thoughts of suicide, the battle with depression and anxiety, the fear of returning to work. And so Ben is now a national speaker that talks about his experience and how he overcame it. But the fact is, there were no policies in place to help him. And there were a lot of things that went wrong with this event. This is my colleague, Kelly Adams from the Detroit Fire Department. She is a firefighter EMT, 15 years on the job. In October of 2015, they got a call about a female with an injured ankle at a homeless shelter that they had been to before. Within 8 minutes, Kelly was fighting for her life. Her partner was attacked by a man with a box cutter. He was the bystander or the partner of the injured party. And she intervened to stop her partner from being killed because at this point he had 2 defensive wounds to his hands and he was bleeding out. Warning, this is a very violent image. I'll go quickly. This is Kelly's face after the attack. These are the injuries that she faced. It has been millions of dollars in plastic surgery. 8 years later, she still has not returned to work. So there are many different scenarios under which workplace violence occurs for fire and EMS personnel. They can be verbal and physical. So let me ask you a question. What do you think the prevalence of workplace violence is? A study done in 2013 found that X percentage of EMS responders experienced at least one instance of physical and or verbal violence in the last 12 months. I'll give you a second to think about what your answer might be. The correct answer is C. 69% of EMS responders experienced physical and or verbal violence within the last 12 months. And indeed, when we look at the National Firefighter Near-Miss Reporting System and we cut it down to just EMS runs, the #1 mechanism of injury is an assault. We also know from our work at the First Center that paramedics have a 14-fold higher odds of injury than their firefighter colleagues, even though firefighters do first response. Excuse me. So verbal and physical violence from the literature we know is between 57 and 93% career prevalence. And EMS is a critical part of our healthcare system. So If we want our safety net to be intact, we have to protect those workers from being assaulted in the line of duty. Okay, so let's do a test. Here's a violence scenario. This is from real firefighter and EMS responder reports. And you're going to tell me what type of violence this is. Upon making patient contact, the suspected patient began cursing and using racial slurs towards responders without provocation. Which type of violence is this? Physical, verbal, both, or neither? The answer is verbal. They were cursing and using racial slurs. No physical contact had been made. Scenario 2, while assessing a patient who was intoxicated and involved in a motor vehicle accident, he grabbed my butt. He also attempted to grab my breast after that incident. What type of violence is this? Sexual assault, property damage or theft, intimidation, or sexual harassment? It is a sexual assault because there was physical contact. Scenario 3, after the run, the patient was walking away. The boyfriend walked up to the window of the rescue asking what the patient told EMS. EMS asked the patient to back up because he was not wearing a mask. The patient then states, "I'm going to shoot you." EMS drove away from the boyfriend. What type of violence is this? Physical abuse, intimidation, sexual harassment, property damage, or theft? The answer is intimidation. Last one, violence scenario number 4. During transfer from wheelchair to gurney of a combative psych patient, I was punched in the left jaw by the patient. He threatened to assault all personnel on scene, and while I was trying to remove items from his lap so they wouldn't get dropped or broken during the transfer, he swung on me and connected. What type of violence is this? Physical, verbal, both, neither? It is both, physical and verbal. So these things go hand in hand, physical and verbal violence. And in fact, we know from the literature that verbal is the most prevalent form of violence. The first center worked with the Center for Leadership and Innovation in EMS, and they developed a system called Emerge, which is a locked down confidential reporting system for workplace violence. And we modified it in our FEMA AFG grant and launched it in 3 departments in Philadelphia, San Diego, and Dallas. We collected data for about a year to pilot this program. And what we learned is that only 19% of calls reported to Emerge were physical in nature only, 40% were only verbal, and 41% were both. We also learned that law enforcement did not attend to these calls in 55% of the time. And when law enforcement was on scene, only 35% of those calls resulted in an arrest. Also from Emerge, we looked at the severity of physical injuries resulting from patient or bystander assault and the mental health injury severity of those assaults from patients and bystanders. And one of the most significant things we found is that the severity of mental health injuries resulting from workplace violence were more often more severe than physical injuries alone. And when you think back to Ben and Kelly's stories, while they had gross physical injuries, it was the mental health sequelae of that violent encounter that really stayed with them long after their physical injuries healed. So we are very concerned about verbal violence and physical violence, especially because of the mental health implications of that kind of moral injury on your persons. Violence can also be unintentional, where a patient may be compromised in some way that they don't really know that they're hurting you. They may be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. They may have a mental health diagnosis. And indeed, as you know, as providers, their underlying health condition can cause them to be combative. like diabetes, dementia, head injury, those types of things. There are cases where violence is intentional, where it's premeditated. I think I was just reading on one of the fire service listservs about someone who set a house on fire and then started shooting at the firefighters. This is a story I am hearing often, and we collect all of these stories in a news catch at the First Center. So these are things where you're trying to hurt someone. So these are the types of events that actually would lead to a felony conviction, which about half the states in the nation have. If you assault a first responder, it is considered a felony and it goes through the legal process. But I do want to mention that at the First Center, we have actually looked at this issue, and I'm going to put it in the chat again, Sam, for you to share with everyone else. This paper we wrote about everyone thinks that, oh, well, if somebody assaults me on the job, you know, I'll just go to court and I'll get my justice there. And this paper will tell you that that is not going to happen. So the problem is, if we hang out a shingle saying someone's going to jail if they assault you, and that doesn't happen, you have let everyone down. And that's exactly why we've developed these policies. These policies that I'm going to tell you about, the SAVER model policies, are preventative policies. They are going to prevent violence from happening to you. And they are going to take that burden off of you as responders and put it on to the people who run the organization who you work for. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. Now, I have heard this quote all the time. I've been kicked, punched, bitten, spit on, verbally abused, you name it, I've had it all. And this person who was assaulted and had lost time for their injury said, I went to court, and this is where it's disheartening because that's supposed to be felony assault, and I'm wasting my time going to court 2 and 3 times. I knew there was no confidence in the system. I mean, you shouldn't be able to do that to someone who's trying to help you. Felony assault should stick. This quote from one of your colleagues in the field hit me in the heart so much, it became the title of that paper that I just showed you. So when you talk with me, you might end up in print. So just be warned. So all of this stuff leads to cumulative stress overload. And now that we're aware of the impact that workplace violence can have, let's take a look at fire service specific policies that are out there. And we're going to start with things that have let us down and why we had to develop these policies. So there is no federal body or office charged with being the lead agency for EMS, leaving EMS policy development up to states, localities, and individual departments. While workplace violence falls under the purview of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, there are no standards for workplace violence prevention, only guidelines. These guidelines only go so far as to identify risk factors for workplace violence and include 5 essential components to developing a workplace violence prevention program. But it's all up to the individual fire department to figure this all out. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration also has recognized the need to mitigate violence against EMS professionals, but has not yet developed specific policy recommendations for preventing workplace violence, although they were at this event that I'm about to describe to you that led to those policies, as was OSHA, as was NFPA. So I'm not dissing these people. I'm just saying that there are limitations on what they can do, and sometimes your little old fire service research center in Philadelphia can be a little bit more agile, and that's what we've done. So NFPA in 1500 says that fire departments shall develop and maintain written guidelines that establish a standardized approach to the safety of members at incidents that involve violence, unrest, or civil disturbances. So that's what it's all about. You should do this, you should do this. These are great entrees, but what are the actual shoulds that you should be doing? That's what we've developed with you, and we're going to share it with you. I also want to say that there are federal efforts being made to deal with this workplace violence prevention policy gap. It's House Resolution 1309, the Workplace Violence Prevention for Healthcare and Social Service Act. And there's a national call for this and the passage of this act, but its future remains uncertain. So because these policy gaps exist, it's up to your department and your union, if you have one, to create and implement policies that protect you. Fortunately, this job a policy creation has been done for you by the First Center and our fire and rescue service partners and organizations. and Edman was one of them. So if you don't like anything I'm saying, please press the bullshit bottom at the bottom of your Zoom screen and make all complaints to Edman. Thank you very much. So before I tell you about this policy intervention, can I just check in with you, Sam, to see how we're doing? And if there are any questions or bullshit comments from the audience.
Hi, Jen. Yeah, so far so good. We're doing good. I don't see any questions for the time being, but as I've said in the chat, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will get to them at the end. So yeah, we can keep going.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate
Yeah.
it. So my friends, we got this FEMA grant, the very first one to look at the EMS side of fire, to create a systems level checklist to address stress and violence on the job. So this grant that we got was called SAVER, and the systems part of it is really important. So in the tradition of occupational safety and health in the United States, going all the way back to Upton Sinclair in the jungle in the 1900s, we used to just, if somebody fell into a vat of sausage, we'd make them sausage and we just go out to the gate and hire somebody else. We don't do work on the back of the workers anymore, or we shouldn't. But I think in the fire and EMS world, we still often do. So we cannot ask the workers to do more. We have to, as the organizations that employ those workers or congregate those workers, if we are volunteer departments or volunteer operations, to have policies that have their backs. And that is why we developed the SAVER model policies and systems level checklist. Now, in the grant, we said we were going to do this. And we relied on the USFA, IAFF literature review that I talked about when I talked about where the money came from. So everything we learned from your discussions of 40 years of industrial literature and the little bit of things the geeks were saying, we combined that all to make the systems level checklist. And we designed it so that it would speak to each phase of an EMS run. So traveling to the event, getting there before you begin patient care, transport to the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. I'll talk a little bit about that. And so I'm a geek. I'm not a firefighter. I'm not a paramedic or an EMT. So I don't do this by myself. We convened a group of national stakeholders to build this checklist. Here they are. These are the guilty. And I know this may be hard to read, but I just wanted to be transparent with you. These are the people who helped develop the SAVER systems level checklist. They are from fire organizations, EMS organizations, OSHA, NIOSH, some old retired guys, you name it. If they were interested, they were here. We had dispatchers, police officers, all kinds of folks. The thing that I want to highlight here in yellow is there were 4 fire departments who helped us be, really the guinea pigs for what we were going to do. And those fire departments brought not only their leadership, but their union leadership. And then they brought a cross section of providers from the department, from like a 10-year experienced paramedic to the EMS field supervisor to the battalion chief for safety and a dispatcher. So they brought a good mix of people to call bullshit on this and make sure that it passed their sniff test. So these are the phases of response that I'm talking about. But it turned out that what we added, especially as the scientists, is that there was nothing about policies in place about, like, what is our mission statement? Do we care about EMS as much as we do fire? Like, what needs to be there if you were building like a new fire department and you had this large EMS responsibility? How would you frame your policies so that the EMS workers knew they mattered, right? And they knew that this was the bread and butter of the fire department. So that's the pre-event phase. And then the post-event phase is this: after you've been verbally or physically assaulted on the job, somebody needs to know. Because my friends, if I go to city council or Congress or whoever holds the purse strings in your community, if I don't have data on the verbal and physical violence you're experiencing from your community, I don't have a leg to stand on. So we've got to figure out how to report it, and then how to make sure the physical and mental well-being of people who are assaulted on the job, that they return to work whole and healthy. So that's what this whole thing is about. So we had hundreds of items that we were testing along these phases of a response. And then we asked all of those participants to vote and say, which of these would be most feasible, meaning you could get it done in 3 to 6 months in your department, and then rate others that would take longer. And what we learned from them is that half of them were considered to be something that could get done in their departments in 3 to 6 months. So, and I'm going to put this in the chat. I'm going to put a link in the chat again, and everything here is on our website. You go to that publications tab, it's going to be there. But this is the paper where you can read everything about the systems level checklist and what's in it. The one thing that you will, when you read this paper, now don't read it when you're tired because it'll make you fall asleep. Read it in the morning with your coffee. You will see this drumbeat of, is there policy? Is there training on the policy? Because you can't just put policy into your manual. You have to train people on the fact that it's there. Here's how you use it. Here's how it intersects with other policies we have, and we're going to support it. So you've got to constantly train people on policy. So that's the paper. Sam shared it with you. It's on our website. 2 years later, after we've developed this checklist, we brought back those now 3 fire departments who were going to test what we developed and some stakeholders. This was in February 2020. The next month we all shut down and we had the pandemic. So, but here's what we did in those 2 days. We took 174 checklist items. We took the 80 that they voted in the previous meeting as most feasible, meaning they could be done in 3 to 6 months. And we arranged them, we bent them into 8 model policies. They fell into these 8 themes. And so this paper that I will also put into the chat is also available for you. It describes those 8 model policies. I am going to go through them right now. And what I want you to do, my friends, is call me out, right? If you think this is impossible for you or your department, if you don't think that's going to work, call bullshit. But also know that you're calling bullshit on all those 40 people who sat around for days and days and years thinking about how we were going to do this. So it is challenging. And I'll point out some places along the way where I was kind of surprised by the challenges that some of the fire service people brought up. So there are 8 model policies. My friends, they are adopted as a family. So they go into your policy manual together. You don't dilute them out across policies so nobody knows. This is a compendium of your commitment to safety in EMS and protection of all your personnel, fire and EMS, from stress and violence on the job. So let me start with the first one. The mission statement. This is the pre-event phase. If you're setting up a new fire department, how would you let the workers know that you value EMS, that it's important as fire suppression? So the goal of the mission statement is to establish an organization-driven focus on the health and safety of members as they respond to calls, including both EMS workers and patients. Because there's a potential for violence on every call, the policies contained here focus on ensuring that the organization has defined their role and espoused values around keeping their workers safe. The policy statements listed require a clear statement about the importance of safety, health, and well-being and aftercare for members, as well as minimizing concerns related to rank, power, and distribution of available services. So this is the beginning. You would adopt this mission statement, and this goal is what would be the preamble to the components of the policy, which would read, the goal is to promote the health and safety of members by focusing on organizational structure. This policy, SOP, SOG, I'll use the term SOP going forward. This SOP will establish a strong organizational commitment to emergency medical services, which will elevate and prioritize EMS work to the level fire suppression receives. This will support 2 goals, safe EMS workers and quality patient care to the communities served. Now, each policy has subsections because, you know, I'm a policy geek. Let's do it. So and these, let me just say this, my friends, these are model policies. What that means is these are generic model policies developed by the fire service for you that can be modified to your local culture. So as long as you honor the intent of these, you need to put it into your language or some aspects of how fire and rescue work in your area. You can do that. So 1.1, the safety, health, well-being, and aftercare of our members is paramount in order to provide quality community service. Just think for a moment, if your first day on the job, this is what you read. We value equally all duties, roles, and responsibilities in our department. And then your department includes the roles that you specifically have, because not everybody runs EMS, not everybody is associated with fire service, et cetera. EMS responders, firefighters, dispatchers, and leadership will use a team-centric approach in the patient care process. You will work together, not at cross purposes. We recognize that violence is an omnipresent hazard in our work and will implement policies, procedures, and practices to prevent and respond to harm to our members. Regardless of rank or experience, members are encouraged to express any and all violence concerns to each other, to their company officers, to administration, and to the union. Especially with regard to verbal and physical violence, no member shall fear harassment, embarrassment, or punishment. There will be a standing joint labor management and EMS committee that meets regularly to discuss responder safety issues. The department will provide ride-alongs and Fire EMS 101 for local politicians, media, researchers, and clinicians, so they don't forget what this work is really like. The next model policy is defining violence. Believe it or not everyone's singing from the same songbook. So the goal of this policy is to establish consistent, clear language on the definition of violence for use within each fire department. The policy defines who the perpetrators of violence may be and goes on to define each of the following violence types: verbal abuse, property damage, intimidation, physical abuse, sexual harassment, and sexual assault. Further, the policy includes a statement about the need for training on these definitions with necessary examples to help clarify the need for awareness and of actions to mitigate such behaviors. So when you open your policy manual and you go to policy 2 for defining violence, you will see the goal is to use common language in the definition of violence. 2.1, this is how our department defines violence against members. And then you go through, the perpetrator is defined as: verbal abuse is this, property damage or theft is this, intimidation is this, physical abuse is this, sexual harassment is this, sexual assault is this, and training. The department will hold annual training, bullet, IST, whatever, to train members on these definitions. So that's policy 2. Policy 3 of 8, just so you know the end is coming. This is about dispatch, communication, and coordination. The main goal of this policy is to establish a collaborative and highly communicative relationship between EMS, dispatch, and law enforcement so that information is shared concerning violent locations, patients, or other circumstances in a timely manner. Often the police know so much more than fire does. The policy includes statements concerning flagging specific locations that dispatch can note for responders, ensuring proper equipment is provided, including a specific radio frequency to share this information, as well as training to ensure the policy-related practices are put into place properly. So when you open your manual to get to policy 3 on dispatch, communication, and coordination, the goal will be to establish a collaborative and communicative relationship with dispatch and law enforcement designed to provide EMS responders with ample notice, knowledge, and preparation for responding to any previously known violent location, patient, or circumstance. So here's the meat. The department will operationalize a flag in the dispatch system to alert EMS responders to previously known violent locations and individuals. The department has developed the following the SOPs. So you'll see policy, SOP, SOG throughout the 8 model policies. This is where whatever language you use, you would use here. So the department's developed the following SOP for law enforcement notification of emergency response calls that require or request law enforcement backup. And if you already have an existing policy on the book, you'll link to it here. So it's wherever that is, you're going to link to it here. So if I'm thinking about violence, I'm going to see what else exists in the department that may already be there. The department is equipped with the necessary resources to share radio frequency between police and fire dispatch to allow for transparent sharing of information during EMS calls that request or require police assistance. Continuing on in policy 3, the department has developed the following dispatch SOP for launching additional resources to support scene safety. You insert it here. If feasible, dispatchers are required to keep the caller on the line until EMS arrives to ensure that information is shared correctly and effectively. And then training. Every policy you see has a training component. Fire and police dispatchers, EMS responders, and law enforcement officers will receive annual training on the above policies. These are the decisions that your colleagues made. Halfway there, policy 4. This has to do with the assessment and communication of scene conditions. The policy seeks to establish the requirement to assess scene safety and communicate conditions on the ground to others, including standardizing language that initiates action to rescue members in need. Thus, the policy outlines a provision to develop a series of SOPs related to standardizing scene observations and relaying information to others. Once these standardized processes are defined by the department, the policy once again includes a statement about the need for training fire and police dispatchers, EMS responders, and law enforcement officers on these procedures. So this policy has 2 goals. The first is to establish procedures for assessing scene safety and communication of needs during unsafe conditions. The second is to establish standardized language understood by everyone that communicates that a member is in trouble and immediately initiates actions to rescue the member or members without further need for input or clarifications. This may be causing some triggering to those who are listening. I do understand. So the meat of this policy is the department has invoked these SOPs and tools for scene assessment. Insert those here. The department has comprehensive policies for unit staging during events with a potential for violence. Here's examples, but it's not just limited to those. Insert that there. The department has initiated the following SOPs for EMS responders, which require communicating scene conditions and assessing any risk to personal safety upon scene arrival. So this particular policy has a lot of insert to things that may exist somewhere else, but haven't been codified as this is how we prevent violence. The department has developed the following SOP, which outlines contextually specific scenarios that may require communicating field updates to dispatch and vice versa. The department has enacted SOPs that safeguard members by calling for backup at the earliest recognition of a threat. To enhance multidepartmental collaboration, universal codes for distress or emergency are shared between police and EMS responders. So your department is going to define with your partners, with your other first responder area agencies, what those codes are. So for example, personnel will use a department-specific term like Mayday, assist, cover now, when they feel threatened and need immediate assistance. If EMS responders require additional assistance, dispatch will initiate the response of the requested agencies, EMS, fire engines, police, however you're going to roll. In the event that verbal communication is not a safe option, there is a panic button mechanism that will signal the need for assistance. It is still surprising to me how many people have radios that don't have the red button. And the last part of this policy is thou shalt train. Fire and EMS dispatchers, EMS responders, and law enforcement officers will receive annual training on the above policies or they will not work. Model policy number 5. This is about standard operating procedures during patient care. Although a variety of checklists and guidelines exist for patient care, this policy focuses on SOPs for patient care activities with a focus on protecting the EMS responder. Specifically, the policy includes provision for an integrative approach to patient care that includes safe practice procedures related to removal of weapons from patients, securing patients physically or chemically with restraints, and a provision for training all personnel on these SOPs. So when you open your policy manual to the violence policy number 5, the goal of that model policy will be to establish policies, procedures, and practices to protect EMS responders during patient care activities. And it looks like this. The following SOPs have been integrated with departmental policies to support EMS responders in potentially threatening calls, drug or alcohol, underlying health condition, et cetera. So you insert those procedures there. They're customized to your local. If the EMS responder safety on scene is at risk, the department has initiated an SOP detailing how and when to leave the scene with or without the patient, and you insert that policy there. The following safe practice SOP has been enacted. So this would be an example. If there are weapons found on a patient or bystander, what happens? Who pats down? Police, you, etc. For patients and provider safety and security, the following SOP must be followed if weapons are discovered when in transit. You insert that policy there based on what your department and your city or town allows. EMS responders will request police escort and or accompaniment for violent or arrested patients. Patients will be properly secured and physically or chemically sedated or restrained in the emergency vehicle using department-approved methods consistent with upholding patient and provider safety. The following SOPs outline when to use restraints, chemical or physical. And so every department has a different policy. You insert yours here. In some circumstances, physical or chemical restraints may require interagency involvement, as described in the SOP. So if that's your case, you have to call for medical clearance, you do that. If body armor is used, the department has the following SOP that supports and encourages the EMS responders in their decision to don body armor. Insert that there. Individuals may ride in the cab or patient care compartment of the emergency vehicle at the EMS responder's discretion. Violent patients must be indicated to receiving staff at the emergency department or healthcare facility prior to arrival. During patient handoff, verbal and or written communication will alert pertinent staff of patient or bystander violence. There is a reporting SOP in place to notify hospitals that an EMS responder has been injured by a patient or bystander. And finally, you guessed it, training. EMS responders will receive annual training on the above policies. You're doing great. We're at Model Policy 6, readiness to return to service. Nobody ever thinks about this, but are you ready to go on that next call? Remarkably, as we talked about earlier with Karasic's job demand control model, individual EMS personnel do not have control over their own situation relative to preparation for work. You can all stop laughing now. Thus, this policy confers authority and autonomy to the EMS responder to decide what resources or help is needed for their continued well-being after every call, including a provision to stay out of service for a period of time. The policy also includes a statement to require the department to use after-action reviews after violent events to understand what was done well, what can be improved, and how to change SOPs to improve safety. Training, again, is mentioned as a necessary component to ensure all dispatchers, responders, supervisors, and others are prepared to carry forward the policy as stated. So this is a big one. The goal of this policy is to confer authority and autonomy to the EMS responder to decide what resources they need to support their physical and psychological well-being after each and every call. It is necessary that members can recover from these occupational stressors. Imagine if you opened up your policy manual and you read this. How would you feel if somebody said it is necessary for you to recover from occupational stress? Because we can't control the call volume, that horse has left the barn. All we can do is give you some decision latitude, some control. So in this policy, the meat reads, members have the power and right to decide what physical and mental resources they need, if any, before returning to service. If resources are requested by the members, supervisors will be automatically dispatched to check in on the well-being of the EMS responder. All department members are entitled to breaks for food, restroom use, and rest during their shift. My friends, I want to tell you, this was the thing on which we had the most argument. I can't give my medics time to pee. I can't give them time to eat. You got to be kidding me. And then those people in administration realized they had 9 to 5 jobs and they're like, oh yeah, maybe we can. But I was really blown away. Units can be forcibly returned to service by their supervisor only under the following specified conditions, and you will put what that is agreed to in your department. Supervisors will offer wellness check-ins following certain calls or circumstances that may impact EMS responders, and you insert whatever those mean. It could be everything, it could be specific call types. The department will utilize after-action reviews for violent events to understand what was done well and what can be improved in future calls. Valuable information gathered from the after-action reviews will be de-identified and shared as practical learning among members. Departmental policies and procedures are subject to modification to protect providers and will regularly consider lessons learned from after-action reviews. And finally, training. Fire dispatchers, EMS responders, and supervisors will receive annual training on the above policies. Almost there, my friends. 7th out of 8 model policy is the reporting of violence. The goal of this policy is to both encourage members to report all incidents of violence, as well as provide a system by which data related to the event are captured for the purpose of learning and advocating on behalf of membership. This includes a provision to ensure a safe culture of reporting and SOPs for steps to be taken by department personnel to ensure all incidents are taken seriously and responded to appropriately. EMS responders and supervisors will receive annual training on the policy provisions. So when you open this up, oh, great, I got to fill out this form. You're going to see this goal in your manual to encourage members to report all incidents of verbal and physical violence experienced in the course of their job duties. This allows for the capture of data, which enables the department and union to advocate for protective resources for EMS responders. Here's what it looks like. To uphold a safe culture of reporting within the department, we encourage EMS responders to report any and all experiences of violence, verbal and physical, regardless of whether a physical injury occurred. All reports collected, including those detailing exposure to violence, will be treated and responded to with concern, respect, diligence, and confidentiality. After receiving reports, the department will guide and support the affected EMS responder to physical and psychological resources. All members will be periodically briefed on reported incidents involving physical and verbal violence through summary reports. This report will include relevant details of the incidents in addition to resources for internal and external support. You know, when somebody falls through a roof, everybody shows up at the ER, but when a medic gets pushed out of the back of the box, nobody comes. So this is about making sure that that doesn't happen again, that there's support for people. Individuals who hold supervisory positions are required to follow an SOP in response to a member filing a report detailing violence. And I'll give you an example of that in just a minute. And guess what, my friends? There's training. EMS responders and supervisors will receive annual training on the above policies so that there will be a culture of value. We want to know if you've experienced verbal or physical violence. We want to do something about it, and we want to support you. Last one, thank you very much for your patience. The last model policy is number 8, mental and physical health support. The goal of this policy is to identify and provide access to resources for EMS responders to assist their physical and psychological well-being. The policy acknowledges both the reality of and the need for attention toward the mental health and well-being of members. Therefore, the policy includes statements requiring the department to engage internal and external resources to target issues of mental health, adopt a non-punitive policy that encourages members to notify others and use the resources available to them, and even includes assistance for responders who need legal help with the judicial process when violently assaulted. Training is once again encouraged on an annual basis to ensure knowledge of and adoption of the developed policies. And here is the goal, the last policy of the 8 model policies around violence. The goal reads to identify and provide access to resources that EMS responders can utilize to support their physical and psychological well-being as part of our mission to sustain a healthy department. Mental health and physical health are equally prioritized in the department. In response to the various challenges that EMS responders face, the following SOPs have been adopted. The department will ensure that members have access to physical and psychological health support and services. Insert those resources here. To ensure the preventative, mental, and post-incident health needs of our members are met, the department will offer diverse and comprehensive mental health support programs. Our department will establish external partnerships with organizations that provide needed levels of support for post-incident supports. The department will have the following services available for EMS responders. This is a laundry list of programs that are out there that are fire service specific and have people who know what firefighters deal with. A non-punitive policy will be implemented to ensure members, to encourage members to notify field supervisors if they believe that their coworker is exhibiting signs of stress. Confidentiality is assured by the department. If you are stressed and then you are providing medical aid, that might not go very well. Personnel have the right to use their department-specific leave, paid time off, sick time, accrued time, in order to maintain their psychological well-being. In my world, we call this a mental health day. With input from EMS responders, best practices for a confidential mental health support system will be implemented. The department has separated EAPs from the offices of department administration to protect the EMS responders' anonymity and privacy. If this separation is not feasible, the department will explore alternative methods of confidential support. An advocate from the department, union, or other will inform a member on what to expect and accompany any assaulted responder to court. We call this support for court. For assaulted responders, preparation for the judicial process and court appearances are compensable activities. And then finally, you guessed it, training. All department and union members will receive annual training on the above policies. Thank you so much for listening to that. From 174 items came 80 that were codified into the 8 model policies you are now familiar with. Now, these are the responsibility of leadership and the unions, if applicable. They have 80 things to do and these 8 model policies to implement. For the worker, for the EMS responder, there are only 6 items that they are accountable for. They are called pause points, and here they are. And this is the phase during a call when they are most useful. If you have knowledge that this is a previously known violent location, request and wait for law enforcement backup. Before exiting the ambulance, are all of the resources you need in place to safely begin patient care? If not, call them up. Before transport, does your patient require restraint and have they been checked for weapons? I can't tell you how many stories about you close those doors and then somebody pulls something out of their pants or out of your rig that they use against you. Are you mentally and physically ready to return for service after you've dropped off that patient at a healthcare facility? If you have experienced verbal or physical violence, have you utilized the appropriate method for reporting? And finally, have you sought and received the physical and long-term mental health resources you feel will enable you to return to work whole and ready? This goes back to that framework, okay? If I have a high strain job and I can't control the increasing call volume, in some cases 20% a year increase in EMS calls, you have to give that worker decision-making ability. You have to give them autonomy. And these 6 pause points are a feedback loop that's shown here in yellow. This actually puts the power in the individual worker's hands. I am telling you out there in the field what is working in your damn policy and what is not working. And if I tell you it's not working, go fix it, because I'm getting slammed out here. So that's the point of pause points, is to tell people when you need time, when you need a moment, when things are not working, and when you are going to get hurt. So those are the 6 pause points. We have a little laminated card we give to an EMS responder. That's all they have to worry about. The fire department, the union, the EMS agency, they have to worry about these policies, implementing them, training on them. Okay, I think this is like my almost last slide. I'm almost there. So implementation, how are we doing? So these policies are ready for you. And the Saver model policies are published and ready to go. So the Philadelphia Fire Department released OP 42, which embraces one of these policies about what should a company officer do when one of their medics has been assaulted on the job. What are the steps that they take? How do they support that person? How do they let the union know what went on if you have a union? All that stuff. It's an SOP, and this SOP is so beautiful. It has tone. I care about you. I want you to be well. This job is not, violence is not an acceptable part of the job. That's what Philly did in response to their participation in developing these policies, and they're doing more. Dallas created a resilience program with Local 58 because they had so much burnout in the department from the volume of runs and the violence that they've experienced over the last years. And so they developed a resilience program to make sure their workers know, and it's a fire service specific resilience program. I told you at the beginning about the workplace violence online training program we are developing for the IAFF as part of a workplace violence curriculum, which will also have an in-person component. So please look to the IAFF in the next year for that course, which will be available to all fire departments in the United States, career combo volunteer. And then finally, look to us. These policies are ready to go. We've written them for you, with you. You'll modify them slightly to your culture and conditions, but you can contact us at the First Center to get a toolkit that will help you begin your implementation. There is no reason, if I don't see any bullshit flags going up yet, I'll check in with Sam in a minute. But if you think that this makes sense to you, why wait? Start doing it now before your next medic or firefighter gets hurt. These are the policies. Again, Sam put this in the chat earlier. You can read this entire paper and see how we got there and see who was involved and read more about the words of your brothers and sisters in fire service family. These are publications that are on our website under our Saver Portfolio tab. You can find them very easily. We've written a lot of things about violence with you. And then finally, if anything that I've said personally or shown you has been triggering or has brought up a memory that you've been suppressing or has been challenging for you, here are some resources for you. And these are all in the paper and on our website. If you remember nothing else, remember that the First Center is there for you. We are committed to the health and safety of the United States Fire and Rescue Service. Career, combination, volunteer, urban, rural, near, far. We work in every state in the country, and we are here for you. Please let us know how we can help you. This is my contact information, and I know Sam will be following up with this slide set, the recording, the papers that I've mentioned today. If there is anything that I can do for you, please let me know. If you have experienced violence and want to talk about it, we have psychologists on the faculty at the First Center who can help elicit from you what the solutions would be in your opinion. They're not clinical treatment people, but they're the people who are working with the systems level to figure out, okay, Bob had that experience. How do we make sure that nobody else has that experience? So we're those kind of docs, if you will. So we're there for you, and please reach out.
So Dr. Taylor, Jen, Sam's been taking care of everything in the chat as it was coming in, but we do have a question from Arthur Howe.
Okay.
What have you or your research learned in the last 2+ years during COVID that is new or newer since pre-COVID? Any surprises? Lots.
These papers aren't out yet. They've just been submitted for publication, but on our website, there's the COVID-19 Rapid Mental Health Assessment. So when the pandemic first started shutting down states, we were like, oh crap, this is just, we already knew how broken everything was and how much you were doing. So we wanted to start measuring mental health impact. And we saw, unsurprisingly, increases in burnout on EMS, increases in burnout on fire as well, because a lot of the people who were totally singularly fire were doing EMS response now. It was all hands on deck. The other thing that we saw a lot of mental health indicators go up, like anxiety and depression. But the thing that was really surprising, and I think this is really important for a lot of the volunteer and combination departments on the call, is we saw an increase in intention to leave the profession. And that's a concern. especially on the volunteer side with recruitment and retention being what they are. So that's a concern that you can only push people so far, and then they'll be like, I don't need this, right? No matter what's in my heart or how much I love this job or how many people in my family have been doing it, eventually you have to protect yourself from breakage, right? And so that's one of the things that really surprised us during the pandemic. And then the last thing I'll say to Chief Howe is that we heard we study management and leadership a lot in the fire service. And we heard that across the board, it didn't matter if you were career, combo, or volunteer, departments are not involving their rank and file in decision-making. And it's a really important safety issue. So that's got to change. We're working on that. Thank you for that.
So I don't see any other questions. I do have to make a comment. For those of you who have never had the opportunity to listen to Ben Vernon or Kelly Adams do their presentations, if excuse me, if you ever have the opportunity, you need to go. And if you're a worker and you're having a difficult time explaining to your management why they need to look at these policies, make them go with you and listen to these two people talk about their experience. If that isn't enough to make people sit up and take notice, I don't know how else to get them there except beat them on the head with a big 2x4. I know I had the opportunity to listen to them at Drexel, and I know I won't soon forget their presentations.
And, Ed, thank you for bringing that up. So the workplace violence course we're developing for the IAFF, Ben and Kelly are part of that with us, and their videos will be embedded into that course. So, and again, that'll be available to everyone.
So I don't see any more questions, all kinds of positive comments. I just want to wrap things up here with everybody. This presentation will be uploaded to the Provident YouTube page. So if you do a Google search for Provident YouTube, you'll find this entire presentation. We are going to attempt to get the entire presentation in a link with the program as it is. If not, we'll get it to you in a PDF file. The videos may make it a little difficult to get it to you any other way. Certificates, you'll get your certificate in the next day or two. Sam will email all of you. That'll have all the links in it for all the links that were put in the chat tonight. So you'll be able to get access to this information. The question was, how can we take this to our union?
Yep.
Here's a perfect way. And the bottom line is, at the end of all this, if you forget any of this or you can't find anything, if you get a hold of me, I can get you pointed in the right direction. So Jen, I want to thank you for a very informative presentation tonight. Based on all the comments we have, I knew you'd blow it out of the water. That's why we don't have a lot of questions. I mean, it's all pretty straightforward. And I really hope that our listeners are able to take the information tonight and make a difference in their organizations. I'll make this offer to anybody. If you need some help trying to convince your managers that they need to go down this road, all you have to do is get in touch with me and I'll do what I can to help, or at least get you pointed in the right direction. So again, tonight's presentation will be uploaded to our Provident YouTube page. Again, all you got to do is do a Google search for Provident YouTube and you'll find it. There will be a 5 question survey at the end of this. Please answer those questions and get back to us so we know what to do going forward, if we need to make any improvements to what we're doing. If you have any questions or need additional resources from today or have an idea for a future webinar, please email us at info@providentins.com and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. This wraps up another Provident webinar. Join us in September when we will be chatting with Heather Makel from the Detect Together to discuss the steps you can take in early intervention for your health and welfare. Until then, stay safe for your family's sake.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, guys. Take care all. Be safe.
Have a great night.